Sounds pretty straightforward. Well, not quite. Taisha, your dad mentioned the sort of spam that you've been getting. What's the most extreme stuff that you think you or your friends could get hold of if you wanted to?
Pretty much porn and street fights, really.
So porn and street fights. And do most of your friends watch that sort of stuff?
We watch street fights, but with the phones, we sometimes get a hold of porn and stuff.
And does that get sent to you, or is that stuff that you look for as well?
That gets sent to us by a random, like, Bluetooth.
We do. Colin Jacobs, you're from an online anti-censorship group. Why not try and block the extreme end of the material that we've been hearing about?
I mean, it would be great if there actually was a switch that the government could turn that would block all of this stuff. But as it happens, that's not simply possible. You can't wave a legislative wand or a technical wand to do that. So the argument isn't really, oh, do we want to block bestiality websites? Of course, everyone would agree on that. But the question is, what is the policy that we're going to implement to try and do that, and will it actually work, and what are the costs?
Well, as I said, what we're trying to do is test it. And I'm just been somewhat bemused about why people don't want to engage in a test. What are people afraid of? If the critics are right, the test will show it can't work. If the critics are wrong, the test will show it can work.
But isn't the key difference here that the system you're proposing is mandatory? It's not an opt-in system. It's a mandatory system that would require...
We don't believe you should opt into child porn. We don't think you should be able to opt into bestiality. We don't believe you should opt into websites that promote rape or incest.
All right, Mark Newton, you're an engineer with the ISP Internode. Why not apply the laws to offshore content?
I can address that in a few ways. In order to be prohibited on the internet in Australia, in order to make it onto the ACMA blacklist, content needs to be refused classification, which doesn't just mean child pornography and bestiality.
And this is material that would be refused classification by the classification board,
yes.
Which is the one that decides what's MA and what's X-rated and so on.
Or it can be X18 plus, which is legal for adults to buy and view everywhere in Australia. Or it can be R18 plus and not behind a restricted access system. R18 plus material is legal to view in Australia in public cinemas. Any adult can walk into a cinema and see R18 plus movies, but they are prohibited content on the internet in Australia. And then the most outrageous one, which is also the most recent addition, which came into force in January last year. Prohibited content on the internet in Australia includes material which is MA15 plus, sold for profit and not behind a restricted access system. This is material which is legal to view on free-to-air television, which is prohibited on the internet.
But that material is on the internet,
yes.
Whether it's prohibited or not.
Sure.
It's still there. But Stephen Conroy, is that right, that this net that you're throwing out to gather in material
This is one of the great
much
furphies that
broader?
people have wanted to engage in to try and create a scare campaign about what we're actually proposing. I've only ever identified refused classification in terms of child porn, bestiality, rape, incest sites, those sorts of things. For adults who want to be able to watch the other material, we're not proposing to do that. We've never proposed to do that. We've talked about giving parents an option. We want to make that available to parents via the ISPs. Now, I think Colin suggested that the state of the art was filters. I mean, Tom Wood made himself famous when he was able to disable inside 30 minutes the previous government's filtering program. Which
cost $84 million,
That's
Tom,
right.
And you were able to disable that?
Yeah.
Cracked it in 30 minutes.
In 30 minutes.
If that's state of the art, it's time to try and move the art on.
I'm just curious to know why the government automatically assumes that they're in a better position to make judgment calls about what is considered appropriate content. And I think that at the heart of any censorship attempt is actually a really patronising and condescending view of the consumer, and that is that we can't make decisions in our best interest and that we can't be trusted with media content. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, child pornography or bestiality or anything like that is acceptable, but there is stuff that is going to be censored that should really be up to us as to whether or not we want to engage with that material.
Home-based filters did not work. The previous government's education did not work. We need to start to find new ways. And internet service provider filtering is working, can work, it does work, and I know the technology experts in this room actually do know that it does work. That's why they are fighting so hard, I believe, against it, because as the Minister said, if it doesn't work, why not let the trials just fail?
Mark?
I don't think there's any question about whether ISP-level filtering is going to be any more effective than PC-level filtering if, as Bernadette's saying, the PC version didn't work. Tom Wood broke out of the previous government's net alert filters in 30 minutes. I am extremely confident that if the government's current plan goes ahead, then I can front up at Senator Conroys' office and demonstrate how I can bypass it in 30 seconds. This is not difficult.
All right.
Yeah, the list works on the basis of complaints. And initially they come to ACMA because that's the place that you take the complaints. And what I'm looking at the moment is a system whereby the classification board can have a role in making that final determination.
All right, David, you're from the classification board. Are you ready for that? It's going to increase your workload a bit.
It would increase the workload enormously, yeah.
Over to the internet, because the internet's sort of the same as books and movies, but of course that really isn't true. The classification board makes something like 8,000 or 9,000 decisions a year on movies, for instance, but there are literally billions and billions of web pages. Millions and millions change every day. So there's really no conceivable workable mechanism by which the government, especially by hand, bureaucrats at ACMA or the classification board, could ever review anything but a minuscule amount of content. Even if we're just talking RC-related content, that adds up to hundreds of millions of web pages potentially.
Maybe it might be helpful to describe what refused classification is at this point so people have an idea.
Yeah.
According to the code, it's material that's so abhorrent that it offends against the standards of decency and morality of a reasonable adult.
Or a computer game that's got a rating above MA.
Oh, yes.
Or a film that shows spanking. Or, I mean, any range of things. And I think I just still want to clarify with the Minister, because the current definition of prohibited content that applies to the blacklist is X-rated films.
Refused classification is,
well, currently,
is a category,
on the ACMA
website.
Sorry, Minister, I mean, currently it says X-rated material, R-rated without age verification, anything that's refused classification. So, I mean, I'm very pleased to hear that X-rated will no longer be on the blacklist, because it's currently on it. And certainly there are, I mean, I have members who have sites who are currently on the blacklist. Again, they didn't know that they were on the blacklist until it was leaked, and it hasn't.
So will X-rated material be on a blacklist?
This is the people again keep confusing between what we're proposing and what is actually on the existing blacklist.
Great.
On the existing blacklist, these were categories created by the former government, and they're the current law. It's 38. You cannot repeal this. Even if the Labor Party decided it wanted to try and change this, it actually won't pass the Senate.
No, but what you're choosing is totally different from a blacklist that's listed to that's advised, that filters are advised about, to a mandatory list. And I think that you might find that members of the opposition may actually consider this a very different proposal to the one that they enacted.
Well, I don't speak on behalf of the opposition. That's their existing policy. Yeah. If they want to change it, then I'm sure you'd welcome that.
Do you think what the government wants to do is possible?
Yes, it is possible. What you end up with is something that I think most ordinary people probably wouldn't consider to be standard internet access anymore.
Firstly, while fetish might be prohibited in a film, it's not prohibited in publication, and we're talking offline. Secondly, how on earth is the classification board, which I've dealt with for many years, how on earth are they going to classify the content on the internet? What's legal in a magazine or in a book is not legal in a film. What's legal in a film is not legal in a computer game. So how do you then transfer that onto the internet? You can't. And you can't possibly ask adult sites, such as the people I represent, to put their films or their web content in for classification prior to putting it up on the internet.
Well, of course I'll try, and I think there's no way it'll be foolproof, because the difference is here, you can't disable it, but there's different things you can do to bypass it, such as proxy sites. We don't know the exact technology and what will get past it, but have no doubt you will be able to. But it'll make things slower and have further privacy risks, so it might be a bit more secure overall. But yeah, I think it's just naive to think anything would be completely foolproof.
And how old are you, Tom?
17.
Like Bluetooth.
We do. Colin Jacobs, you're from an online anti-censorship group. Why not try and block the extreme end of the material that we've been hearing about?
I mean, it would be great if there actually was a switch.
Sounds pretty straightforward. Well, not quite. Taisha, your dad mentioned the sort of spam that you've been getting. What's the most extreme stuff that you think you or your friends could get hold of if you wanted to?
Pretty much porn and street fights, really.
So porn and street fights. And do most of your friends watch that sort of stuff?
We watch street fights, but with the phones, we sometimes get a hold of porn and stuff.
And does that get sent to you, or is that stuff that you look for as well?
That gets sent to us by a random...
That the government could turn that would block all of this stuff. But as it happens, that's not simply possible. You can't wave a legislative wand or a technical wand to do that. So the argument isn't really, oh, do we want to block bestiality?